Everyone wants to take a minute, including myself. I will check my phone to see if we can turn those off so that we don't interrupt ourselves later. Thank you. Oh yeah, good idea. This always happens to me in class. I want to also mention that the Barstool Economists, which is a group, an online group of people who are interested in economic ideas, of which you are all welcome to join if you'd like, we'll have a actual real meeting that will be online, and we will meet after this lecture at Flames Eatery at 88 South San Fernando, which is on the northwest corner right across from the library. And you are welcome to join us for no-host cocktails and something to eat. We look forward to having you join us. Please remember that our last lecture for this semester will be on Tuesday, April 23rd. Tim Sandifer from the Pacific Legal Foundation will be here, and he will be discussing the right to earn a living, a case study in business licensing. So we hope you can join us for that. This lecture series began in the fall of 2001 to foster our vision of higher education, the arena for challenging established ideas and practicing critical thinking using respectful intellectual discourse. As we have said before, I'd like you to sit back and ponder, enjoy the comments tonight from Dr. Szapiro. Tomasz Szapiro is here from the Warsaw School of Economics. He will be discussing the current European experiment in transforming higher education. As I think many of us are aware that higher education is transforming in front of us, and it will be interesting to see how we can shape that for the future, and I'm very curious to see what's happening in Europe. At the end of his presentation, we'll have about a half an hour to ask questions, so you'll be encouraged. I encourage you to ask more in-depth questions. It's our hope that this lecture series encourages new ideas and a greater appreciation for well-reasoned and diverse ideas. Please let me introduce Professor Szapiro for us tonight and give him a hand right now. Professor Szapiro is the president of the Warsaw School of Economics and professor of economics. He teaches operations research and econometrics. He holds an MS in physics and a Ph.D. in mathematics. He is also professor of the Institute of Modern Civilization at the Warsaw School of Economics and an adjunct professor of international business studies at Carlson School of Business at the University of Minneapolis in Minnesota. He has lectured at Carleton University in Ottawa and the University of Ottawa. His research interests include operations research, IT, the economics of privacy, as well as the economics of education. He is widely published with 2 books and over 120 journal articles. In his spare time, if that would leave most of us any spare time, he is a referee for top-rated research journals, an expert for the European and Fulbright commissions, and advisor for the ministers of finance, economy, and education in Poland. You know, why not, right? It gives you something to do when you don't really have anything else to do. He has twice received awards for teaching excellence at the Canadian Executive MBA program. Please welcome Professor Szapiro.
It was really very pleasant to hear all of this. Anyway, I think I should start from some explanations. Maybe first about this new normality. Why normality? What is new? This is allusion to a text that was published, at least written, in McKinsey quarterly on something that is surprising, namely in the crisis of 2007, with very serious events related to bankruptcy of firms, everything changed. I mean, credit is more difficult, and they check us. Lots of new regulations, and it happened like 5 years ago, and we are not even realizing that that's new. That some 5 years ago it was very different. It was easy to get the credit, and we were very optimistic. We are always optimistic, but it's different. So the question rises whether in education, I realized when somebody has given me this article to read that this is very similar. That I'm living and teaching for years, I didn't realize that I have completely new reality in education. And I would like to somehow share with you argument that show that it happened. And it happened not maybe in 5 years, it took maybe longer, but the world is very different from this point of view. So that was my initial starting point and reason that I selected this topic. And of course, it's very provocative if you have a possibility to talk in provocative lecture series, because then, contrary to any other lectures, you realize that you should rather finish with questions than answers. So I thought how to organize this, and I will try to make it in the way that I split this in episodes. And I will try to show what happens and what question marks sign milestones in this argument, and show what this new reality shows and how it forces us to think on how to cope with issues resulted from this new situation. So let me start with a slide showing it. We return about 2,000 years to Greek Agora, a place where you see famous philosophers Plato and Socrates, and they talk and discuss on issues they do not need to nothing but encounter. Education results from encounter, and it was generalized, in fact, in theology of encounter. We live when we meet and discuss. If we have very, very brilliant thoughts and we do not have somebody to share them with, then we do not, in fact, live. We are alive, but we do not live. And also what is important, that it is part of life, and it is also, it happens on the street, in fact. So it is not closed, it is open space. Let me jump this 2,000 years and tell us a case study story of my university, and a little bit I was asked to clarify some issues, some insights from Europe and from Poland. So history of my university starts with an aristocrat and his beautiful, interesting wife, and his ambition to build educational institution. It works for 15 students. It's politically incorrect nowadays. Only men were accepted at this university. And it took almost 20 years to come to this bureaucratic view of what is now replaced by transcripts. Those are booklets called indexes, which confirm achievement of students, and there is a seal of the university, and soon there is a building, and then a next one, which is about 60 years old, was looking like that, 60 years old, but there was after a war, and everything was destroyed. So after war it was rebuilt for the second time, and decades pass. This is how it looks more or less now. It was not organized by myself, but really it makes me impressed that I have a night photo and we have dark class. So now we are in more known to you situation with international students body, with students, the greatest exchange in Poland with external students. And we have and really care about tradition. I like this photo because the red guy in the middle is myself. I serve as director, and there is a girl also with a red bag, but it was not, thought like this. So we have this school which is has long story. I was trying to make it as short as possible. Important things are that with this tradition, as you imagine, it was typical university with lectures and exercise classes and with lots of famous people who were graduated from these schools, who were prime ministers and ministers and also heads of corporations. With such a history, there are some very, I would say, thrilling stories. During conspiracy, the school has to change its name. During pressure of Soviet dependence, we had changed name to School of Planning and Statistics to reveal the official ideology. But then 25 years ago, we have returned to the historical name, Warsaw School of Economics in English, in Polish Main School of Commerce, because under occupancy we couldn't be university, so we used main school etiquette, which was for Poles an allusion to the first Polish university, military, in fact, school. So then we have adopted this historical name, and as a public university, in fact, there is act of the parliament that sets frames for our university. So in terms of numbers, as you see, about 15,500 students in 2 years ago, about 170,000 graduates. It's unbelievable. We call it capital of relations, social capital. Alumni who support our students, who know how take advantage of this situation. We have lots of students or associations. We offer education at bachelor, master, and doctoral level with about 800 of teaching staff. We have corporate, and maybe you see in this moment or not, but the scene changes slightly because it was not even politically correct that university interact with business. University was a clean space for thought, for philosophers, and suddenly in this late 90s, we are proud to cooperate with well-recognized corporations, and we even expand our institution. We set up so-called Partners Club, where these corporations, 15, create a sort of a consulting board which supports us in building strategical development, in definition of new curricula, in orientation, I would call it. They tell us how to strengthen position in international relations. Some of them are alumni, also famous universities. They help us to set up new relations with new universities like yours. And finally, they help us in supporting and getting funds from other business partners. This is expansion, in fact, and completely new view of a university compared to the one that existed in 70s of former century. And moreover, we may say that this cooperation is alive, and I'm showing here 2 or 3 or 5 courses, in fact, which are taught in total by our business partners, and they introduce some content which could be very difficult to design at university, as we are working. We have a lot of teaching, probably more than here, because Polish classes are supplied with lots of hours of foreign languages. Our students have to spend about 10 hours weekly learning 2 foreign languages for 3 years, and the second one even more for 5 years. So academic teachers teach longer, and we are supplied with these very new streams of knowledge, of skills from people from business. Let me not talk on details about alumni, but maybe about their opinions. We made surveys, and this is surprising, and a new thing, showing another dimension of new normality. 1 of 3 students studied at least 1 semester abroad, and 30% of the first level, so undergraduate school, and 60% of the graduate school has some work experience. So that means that or it was internship or summer job spent in corporation, expanding what we do in class. Maybe not to talk about all numbers, I will tell that 85% of alumni works in the area of their education. It's not very frequent in Europe. 92% are satisfied with their job, and one of reasons for our proud is that during 3 months all of alumni get the job, which in country with unemployment is a great success. Probably our salaries cannot be compared with US because this is very different level of spending is needed. So this is maybe not so important, but we also are conscious and aware of some weaknesses. And this is, of course, communication, because having academic background and European style of teaching classes in theoretical way, we have problems with teaching business communication. Even though they speak fluently, at least one, and very good with the second language, speaking language is not equivalent to business communication. Then there is a problem of risk attitude. Business calls for risk attitude, and not usually in students groups in schools of business, there is a greater share of risk takers than in other groups of physicians, let's say, or physicists. But in case of Poland, this attitude toward risk-taking is not satisfactory, and this is important feature if you think about success in business, is to ability to take risky actions also, and to manage the risk and evaluate the risk. And teamwork, that's well known. We make a lot of things to teach Poles of teamwork, because we are a country of individualists, and saying says 2 Poles means 6 different opinions. So this is a challenge. We are trying to create some new ideas, and since one of problems is that we want to learn to teach this interaction and to make this more applicable knowledge, so we are now designing a platform, a web-based platform, where we can match our unbelievable network of alumni with students and practitioners, and build a sort of exchange where people could meet, and somehow lecturers could invite practitioners, and practitioners can get satisfactions from interacting with their university. They are usually local patriots, and if something happens to the university, they call us. So the problem is that, contrary to the situation here, where you have established institutions that support this interaction, we have to create this. But on the other hand, maybe we will make it at the bigger scale due to possibility to use the internet and start from beginning with this modern medium. So new educational landscape looks like follows. We have new curricula, we have new concentrations, and new attitudes replace traditional academic approaches. This is sometimes really revolutionary. I mean, we live in times where mathematical proofs can be shown by computers, and even some hypotheses can be supported by computers and not supported by human minds, so that at least they wait for argument. And this is a tough issue if such results are truth. We have, on the other hand, we face all problems result with economy, which are maybe slightly, different than in your country, but still young people on labor market are in a very difficult situation, since the labor market changed in Europe and in Poland also, and we do not have a situation that you cannot get job for the whole your life. So in fact, even maybe you've heard about Alan Toffler's concept of this 8 years lasting careers, when after 8 years engineer changes occupation and profession a bit in order to get greater satisfaction. However, this was a change relatively small. I mean, engineering still, but maybe in other branch of industry. Nowadays, it looks that more and more students and then workers, people, employees, they work for 2-3 years and they have breaks, and then they again work in completely different branch, because in the meantime economy has changed. And some companies also have such a strategy to base on part-time employment and also employing students. And my recent experience was 30% of students who are in fact employed in company for short-term, like internships, 1 to 3 months internship. It is for sometimes it's even voluntary, so costs of employment are much lower, and there is no reason to believe that firm will change its strategy. It pays off, and also students find a kind of rational reason to work in such a way as a voluntary workers, since they signal to next employees that they have experience and their price on market is higher. So we face the change that somehow influences also functions of university. Next thing is that in Poland we have a relatively liberal, strange but liberal market for educational services. I'm not even talking about education, because education is for me something more closer to this agora that was shown, but I'm calling this educational services. We had about 30 years ago 100 of universities, now we have 400. The group of students tripled from 700,000 to 2 million of students, and we are very proud that the level of education in Poland rised. Quality of this education will be a topic on one of next slides. But this means that we have 400 of universities that fight for students. So it's not a situation that you get a tenured position at university for the whole life. Also, professors face a challenge and have to somehow exist in this environment. Next, we have new regulations. Autonomous university, that meant that university could decide on how it works, what are research directions, and decisions on promotion of researchers were subjected to university. External, governmental, other forces were not allowed to act at the university. It changes a bit. Now we expand this area, entering some decisions related with economy. So that's again a completely new area of actions of university. Let's call them educational managers, authorities of universities. So the academic space is reshaped, and academic staff is expected to serve not only to the truth, as we used to say some 40, 50 years ago, but also has to be innovative, to create a new educational offer, to update existing offer, and to survive somehow with relatively criticized, at least at university level, of compensation for this work, so simply speaking, salaries. Let us, talking at such economics lecture, talk a while on models. Again, let me give you through, this is like a case, it's called sometimes stylized facts. So we have a country with about 40 million population. I'm talking about Poland in such a strange way. Over 50% of respective cohorts is in educational institution, compared to 8% 40 years earlier, and a percent or half of part of percent some 100 years ago. 2 million students, as I mentioned, tripled, and only 25% of teachers' population greater. I mean, people who work at universities and support. So 80,000 compared to 60,000. As you see, here increase is slow. So we have now per one, let's say, professor, 25 students. Earlier it was 12. We also face the decreased number of hours in classes, and we teach foreign languages at this scale, as I mentioned, not known here. So there is issue of quality. And on the other hand, if you look at quality, you may think about measurements of effectiveness. There are some people who work on such things, and they launch a project which is called from Performance Index of Students' Achievements. And results, I will mention on that earlier, show that still, at least Polish education looks very well. I will show this also compared to other countries' results. We have therefore, sorry, I'm moving not in this direction. So I took typical MBA course to show where is rooted the problem of quality. A typical MBA program in Poland lasts about 10 months, and we have to have a group about 30 participants, and the cost per person is about $15,000, and we have about 50 such programs. The value of program, as you see, is close to $500,000, so not too much, but it is amount of money that is worth of consideration. The market, I don't think it's the greatest, however, cannot be neglected. Excuse me. So how it looks from point of view of economic mechanism? We have income, and we have to use this income for running costs of quality of teaching, and we have some other spending to have such a cost. As this is such a small group of students to have MBA course, you may think about just doing it yourself. You are leaving the university like this, you see 500,000. Why not to think on that? You have to rent a class, you have to pay some teaching staff, you probably administrative staff, but there's 1 or 2 people. So maybe there are some other expenditures. The quality cost is related with the problem that everything has to be checked, and then there are some rankings, and this is not visible part of activity, not visible to students, and therefore there is a temptation to somehow decrease this part from our equation. So what happens if you are tempted not to perform any activities aimed at quality? You have decrease of quality, of course, because if something is not controlled, therefore you save money, but the quality is lower. What happens there? There are 2 possibilities. First of all, what is very important here, that you may be tempted only if this money spent on quality is not perceived by the environment, by students and future candidates. So if there is no such a perception, independently on if you spend quality or not, the market spoils. I mean, we face decrease of quality of teaching. Decrease of quality of teaching means that finally, in macroeconomic sense, GNP is not rising as fast as it could, so you faced a cost for the whole society. So if you have no expenditures on quality, you have lower costs and you can offer lower price. I mean, the program can afford lower price for their service, and you can attract more students. So what you get is a massive education of low quality. And this is a kind of implication that is necessary. On the other hand, if there is, if you have such expenditures for quality, assuming that you are starting, this means that you have higher costs and therefore you have to balance it with higher prices and you lose some students. So you have a light education of low quality because you are tempted not to spend this money. You cut the costs because of competition also. You have to face competition with offer of these universities, of these programs that are not looking at the quality. And finally, you also decrease quality to somehow survive on the market. So perception of quality is crucial. And there are some tools that can support mechanisms that help us to understand if the program is of high or low quality. The problem itself is very difficult for so-called in economy household. It's really difficult to compare program at Stanford and at Wharton School of Business and tell which one is better and why it's better, or I mean it has higher quality. So there is a machinery that explains how to evaluate this quality, and it's complicated and expensive again, and that explains also why I mentioned earlier that there is significant this quality cost, because you have to involve, depending on stakeholders, and those are participants because first of all students are interested and they pay, but also the school that offers MBA program is interested in having good MBA because it's a part of prestige and position of the school, and this is implying that good or bad candidates and so on and so on. So some measurable outcomes depend on that. And then we are, of course, we have corporations and firms which we hire, and for them MBAs are, from our point of view, it's our production, so the people are here products, and high quality is of importance. And finally, we have fourth actor, which is government, which also is interested in having good program for executives, because good executives create new jobs and help to increase wealth in the country. And as you see, we have very different and complex system because we have different evaluators, and we have to somehow coordinate this process of evaluation, and which is also very important, the process of communication to society, results of this process of evaluation of quality. So let us observe that it's expensive and difficult and necessary. How it looks from point of view of Europe in terms of spending of society and not people. So numbers for education maybe are not surprising. In European countries, from 3.5% to almost 8% of gross domestic products is spent for education. In fact, free education is not free. I mean, more and more students of public schools pay for some services in Europe, like supplementary courses, supplementary exams, and different things like that. So co-financing is widely observed. Moreover, this free education is in fact not free because it is costs of teaching are covered by states and from money from taxpayers. So there is a sort of injustice in this mechanism because people who do not have children pay taxes and therefore they pay for education of people who have children. So this is not very simple. On the other hand, results of education will influence everybody, not only people who are educated, and I will touch this point a bit later. And also we are educated population. I mean, from 49 to 98% of individual or cohort between 19 and 24 years studies in Europe. That's something unbelievably important, I think, and it has very strong economic consequences as educated people better absorb their technology and they make smooth economic growth. In Poland, we are just in the middle. So we may imagine that Poland has somehow adopted their system to European with all specificities that we have in our country. Of course, education is debate. I would say that there are two streams of debate. One is during elections. Politicians like to talk on education. Usually they criticize it and they promise lots of things that will be repeated during next elections by next politicians. But there are some main tracks which are very interesting. Those are they show a common denominator, which is co-financing. So there are several ways how people think about change of regime of financing of education in order to put responsibility in this system. One of them is the educational voucher, which means that if a child is born, gets educational voucher and can go with this voucher to any university she or he wishes and leave this voucher, and this voucher will be a sort of money for university that will be spent and therefore will allow to manage the university independently. And if you believe that quality is important, measured and communicated to society, then vouchers will be a next instrument that will reward high quality. Another thing is under discussion is very strong effort to introduce co-financing at public educational institution as a rule. And there are several arguments given. One of them is that, for example, if you pay, if your fee is, let's say, 10,000, and if you pay even 200 yourself, your attitude is different when you learn, when you participate in the life of university. There are, of course, much more sophisticated arguments that are shown in this debate. And then, which is sort of new, there is also a kind of pressure to devote some money from state budget for private institutions to make the competition among educational institutions more healthy, because competition is improving quality and good for society under some well-defined in economy circumstances, and these conditions have to required by a healthy competition required to more or less equal treatment of all partners. So we are at completely different levels. So we are very far from this agora. We are very far from the aristocrat that has founded my university. We live in completely different world. But interesting is if it's effective, if it is expensive. And this can be measured. I tried to make it, and it appeared extremely difficult. So first of all, you have to think about model. You see that I'm looking from public point of view and private point of view at economic and social impacts of education. So, for example, if people invest in education, then there is increase of taxes because it's related with growth, economic growth, and therefore taxes which are dependent on growth. The higher growth, the higher taxes. There is increased productivity. We believe that we are paying for education because we are then more productive. So if we look at this scale of country, it's from public point of view, it's profit from investment in education. If you take individual point of view, you invest in education, or country invest in education, the risk of unemployment is lower, wages rise, higher level of savings, higher mobility. Those are evident profits. On the other hand, quality of life rises if you consider social dimension. From public point of view, the absorption of technology is probably the most important at the very last point, but also decreased criminality. And this is more or less empirically proven. It is visible. So it is a question how much is spent for education. But before I will do it, I want to show another factor that is not visible. It is a problem of motives, which can be measured also and are measured. So this is called, for example, private return, rate of private return. I'm more or less that means that assume that the way to compute it is very easy. Assume that I am 25 years old, beautiful assumption, and I have some salary that I relatively safely can have each month. And I stop myself from working and I pay for education for, let's say, 3 years. After 3 years, I return and I have higher salary. So I can find a difference in salaries, and then I can subtract the cost of studies, and what I get is a return from studies. And here you see Poland and US. As you see, Poland has very high return from investment, and this is a private investment because this is based on Polish, on this new system of private universities that was set up 20 years ago. So people were really paying for directly to universities for education in order to get job. And in states, what was for me a surprise first, we see a difference that it is low. That was surprising. A rich country and return is lower. But the reason is because Poland, in time of this measure, was under so-called educational boom. I mean, the rising of market economy created demand for people who could serve as officers of economy, for people who could, for accountants, for any activity related with finance and marketing, completely new branch and so on. So there was really a rent for somebody who could enter and face this demand, and there were relatively high salaries. So this is one way how you can compute whether your spendings are rational and if the return is justifying decision on further education. On the other hand, you can make the same for macroeconomic data, and I made here I want to show here two graphs. They are completely not to understand. Even if compare both of them, you see that fluctuations are very high, and the only thing that can be seen is that in Western Europe, compared to Central Eastern Europe, the curve is slightly going up, which means that the stable economy investment in education slowly rises. Difficult. So I was trying to evaluate how much money is spent for education in all countries. There is databases. I used OECD data. If somebody is interested, I have a backup copy explaining all these details, but I think that conclusion is incredible. And I was checking this several times. There are several weak points in this analysis. But yearly budgets for education all around the world based on data and somehow averaging different educational systems and different sources show that an unbelievable amount of money is spent for education in the world. So there is a question about waste, of course. Okay. There is also an issue of waste raised by McKinsey Quarterly when the first result of PISA survey were published, and they shown that for example, place of United States is slightly improved, but the average score in mathematics is the same exactly. And there is a question: how much you have to spend in order to get the first place. Of course, in states you have to be leader. So there is about 100 points to get. So probably you have to know how much to spend for 1 point in this ranking, and it was computed for mathematics. It was $165. It appeared that is the highest amount to get 1 grade. So in states you spend the highest amount of money to get 1 point of score of efficiency in mathematics, let's say, for children, for youngsters, in fact. And those were trillions, if you would like to pay for the whole nation and for all lacking 100 points to be on the first place. So we see that there is a problem of efficiency and waste of enormous amount of money put into education. Well, this is another dimension of new normality in education, because I don't think that in Greek Agora in 19th century somebody would think in such terms, would even ask such questions. Another thing is demography. You see, that's a Polish case, and it is 30% of a cohort of people who are students which will be not born. I mean, demographic trends will show decrease in number of students resulted from low fertility, and this is characteristics of democracies of well-developed countries, which means that even if you can have input for teaching at public university and private universities cannot have such a security, then you have to cope somehow with this problem that 1/3 of your students will not come in next 10, 20 years. So we have to do something and face this reality at university. So there is, of course, an attempt at diplomatic action. As you may imagine, in Europe, first of all, there is such a EUA, an organization, and rectors meet and they debate. So in 2005 they claimed that spending of government for university is too low, at least compared to US, and should be raised. Some 5 years later, in different place, the same association tells that the the most important issue to provide accurate information and look at performance. There is a criticism on inefficiency of European universities, and it's more or less at the same time transatlantic dialogue starts with American and Canadian rectors, European rectors, come to conclusion that accountability and control of universities becomes the most important issue in management of educational institutions. And there is even a reform agenda. I'm putting this dimension of accountability and quality and efficiency as I was trying to explain that those are very difficult issues, and they are difficult not only for political point of reason. As you see, the agenda is really detailed. And let me return to slowly to finish with this observation and remarks, and return to what's happening in Europe and then in Poland. So in Europe we have this Bologna process. So that's the attempt to involve multicultural dimension and expand education for other participants of this market. So not only generation 1924, but also for people who are over 50, over 60, and in fact a beautiful idea of I think 11 rectors of European universities called Declaration of Bologna was showing that what is really important is to make to spend more time for studying at university and facilitate mobility of students and professors. That's a dimension that is calling of immediate action. And then a couple of ministers of education, because there is no a common education policy, so that was a kind of very, maybe not spontaneous, but not a procedural action. They decided on attempt to create so-called Bologna process and to facilitate mobility through adjustment of internal regulation that would help students to travel all around Europe. More or less, that means that we have to somehow certify periods of studies at one university, at the other university, and therefore the system of transfer of credit points has to be established, and very technical solutions are to be introduced and are being introduced, and that's my reality in Poland when I live now, because the Bologna process continues. So how it looks like from point of view of my university is that I grown up in the system where I was, the Warsaw School of Economics is this bold part, universities. Generation over 19 could be accepted at university. I was coming then, had some history in nursery or school, could have some continuation of educational track, but that was very simple and in fact a short one. After the Bologna process, the so-called 3L, long life learning, became a task and direction of development of universities. So we have now these a choice, or I call it islands, because you get education in nursery and in school or Ph.D. program at very different places, and it was not your choice because you could want to face another educational culture, but that was just a system how it works. And now we are trying to create at university what is called Agora, modern Agora. Namely, we think about setting up a WSE preschool for children of our teachers. We have, in fact, a high school that is where our teachers, our colleagues teach. We have MBA programs, we have and each graduate of each program in fact is invited to return. So again, we see that we have completely new challenge. It's not only to write articles, it's not publish or perish only. It's also to survive in terms of commercial sale of educational services, of building knowledge which leads to invention, but also to host people. And here we have this unbelievable third age university success with 600 60 years old guys coming and learning sometimes from students, volunteers who teach them how to cope with computer that hangs up or something like this. And this network of services is now a challenge, and this is entering a new normality in education. This is absolutely revolutionary task, because there is no way existing how to compensate effort of people and how to hire people for that and how to use alumni for this, and everything is on the other hand must, because given 30% lower population of students, we have to somehow think about firing people at the unbelievable scale, and we want to avoid this. Excuse me again, not this direction. So, if I would summarize slowly, universities have to compete to attract students, have to access and teach students using internet, and have to survive in a world when you can get education from internet, you can travel easily, you have global alliances, and therefore it's not easy to be visible. You have to change, and that's the most difficult role of academic staff, and expand this agora-type normality to a new one, and expand abilities of decision makers at university, rectors, deans, for a new reality where they are also managers. And in fact, we do not know what is a good profile of educational manager, and how not to destroy ability to create what is most task, truth. I mean, discover new theorems, new inventions. So there is some research on that, and it is showing that this is a difficult task again, because simulations and this type of modeling shows that you can get through some actions improvement, but the increase in welfare in the country can be temporary only, that results for poor and rich people are different, which means that you may face easily political tensions, and finally that you may have effective investment. That means that the effective, I'm thinking in terms of macroeconomy, GDP will rise. However, cost of the change will be higher than the rise of GDP. So you, in fact, are in a kind of bipolar situation, or you may have this paradise of Sunday in Brueg's painting, or the hell of Dürer. And in fact, you have to understand how it works, and this is a really complex problem. So there are some policy implications which say that one has to improve effectiveness of private as well as public spending for education through re-engineering of educational regimes, because it's what we face. However, there is no theory on how it should be done. And then you have to optimize this financial regime, I mean co-financing away proportions, and you can use multi-agent simulation methods, and we are doing such research to check if modeling not homogeneous like in traditional economic models, but heterogeneous populations and their interactions involving multicultural differences, how to evaluate, first of all, effective scenarios, and secondly, risk of such a of such a change. And implications for policy is that this task calls for international action because it's not possible differently, and a process is not easy because some interdisciplinary teams of analysts and policymakers have to be created. Next, some standards for collection of data should be created also. And finally, there should be a political institution built to create an agenda for changes and implementation of this strategy. However, comparing even intuitively this unbelievable spending for education and agreement of these bodies of rectors, diplomats, and educational policymakers on lack of transparency and accountability of spendings for education, and the relatively low but at least measurable cost of this shown in blue institution that is to be created, it seems that this cost of building such a body that will allow benchmarking will be justified from economic point of view. So to summarize, I would say new normality in education requires re-engineering of the old model involving interdisciplinary teaching, research, transparency and accountability in management, and also creation of standards allowing to comparisons of effectiveness. And very difficult coping with outdated perception of the system, which are biasing educational managers' minds. Speaking directly, it's a problem how to cope with conservative part of academic staff. And the conclusion is that international cooperation in this area is one of, for the moment it seems the only one, way to provide with benchmarks that will help us to see how the new normality education evolves and how it can be corrected to make it possibly rational from economic point of view. So those are things that I would like to share with you. I hope if you have some questions, I haven't left too much time, but there were no protests, so I feel justified. Thank you very much.
If there's not room to ask questions after that presentation, I would be surprised. All right. So who wants to go first? Well, don't all speak up at once.
So I notice from the model, it would seem that a combination of an employment agency and an educational institution that was geared to promise hiring and promise increase in salary that's larger than the expense and competitive might be the most competitive way to proceed. I'd like your comment, please.
Yes. In fact, that's a comment, so I will not maybe comment on that. But it's also visible at the level of macroeconomy, because if you are talking about change of regime, that means that the regulatory, so state, will change rules. So the simplest way to think about this that state covers half of expenses, for example, and co-finance, and then half, 1/3, 1/4, that can be simulated, and results are surprising. For example, if we have modeled this problem, it appeared that effectiveness is acceptable if quality of teaching at private universities is high enough, because then with such a structure, the whole economy is productive, and the growth can cover this cost of supporting at the level 50% each student that wants to study independently on private or public universities.
Someone else? This is a quiet group. So I'm curious, we tend to look at education as a single silo, but it's actually multiple silos, and we could divide it into two categories if we thought about it. One is a way of thinking, and one is a set of skills that are data-based, right? And there's the data-based ones seem to be easier to evaluate, but the thinking skills don't. So what mechanism is there to test the effectiveness of the improvement in thinking skills?
Well, I think that we have, in fact, two ways. One is to think in terms of macroeconomy. So then you compare spending on education. I mean, share of budget that is spent for education on one hand, and on the second hand is simply growth, economic growth. And then this is called a public rate of return from education, and that's the most common method how to look at that. On the other hand, you have this private rate that I was talking about, and also you have analysis at the level of, I would call it mezzo-economy, because it is at the level of educational institution. And I think that these three measures of cost effectiveness, in fact, are classical but cannot be replaced. However, the problem is that costs and effects are very difficult to compare because we have so different, and we like this, we have so different systems in, let's say, in Asia, in Europe, in States, and those are completely different things. So we have problems how to use this formula, not because of formula, because of data. You have to put data into formula to get results. So maybe that's a short answer to this question.
Do you think that there's a place for the marketplace to determine which institutions are doing a better job of doing that?
I mean, I wouldn't put on market the problem whether 2 + 2 gives 4. But there is really a large part of this educational economy that can be market-driven under assumption that the system is transparent and that decisions at any level are taking into account economic calculus of benefits, profits, and they involve this also intangible part, which is related with skills, for example. And I can hardly imagine other than benchmark analysis of efficiency of universities, because in fact, finally, it depends, of course, on framework, how you define the system and its goals. But you cannot omit in any way that you are providing labor for employers. So their decision on employment has to be taken into account. So that's external measure that is not internal, not depends on our decisions. It is external. So you could say how many of your alumni survive on the market having job. And so we need to have multiple criteria system of evaluations, and we have to somehow communicate, which is not easy, to audience, which is not, to households, which are not used to think in multiple criteria types of methodologies. So you have to find a way to communicate, like ratings, sometimes rankings, depending on the situation. But I think to return to the problem that that market is one of criteria that help to value the result of our work at university. And as sometimes we have these market deficiencies, and result of this evaluation may show that 2 + 2 is not 4. Therefore, I made this remark that maybe some parts of our work cannot be judged based on employers' decisions on employment. Also because there are other motives than providing people with opportunity to work. I mean about so-called self-development, about psychological dimensions, that you simply are attracted by something, or you simply want to invent something, to create a new truth, and you are not then that much interested in compensation for this work. You want to get some amount of money to survive, but really you feed yourself with your work. That's a small group, but maybe that's a group that really creates a progress. So that's why I'm talking that benchmarking here is important. Still, from point of view of taxpayer, you have to be more transparent, I'm sure.
I noticed that you have tried to take the Warsaw School of Economics and integrate companies with it more closely, at least, than what we're doing right here. And have you found do you think that is a step towards being more transparent?
Not only. That's because probably one of our weaknesses, in States you are not very eager to talk about weaknesses. It's a different culture. But if I would complain, I would say that one of our problems is that we are really formed in the previous normality, and we face a new one, and education is checked in long horizon. So therefore, one of my problems is that we have to somehow update our curriculum. We see that the world changes so fast that it would be not honest to accept students at university and promise them unbelievably modern education, knowing that what we teach nowadays has to be changed. And now there is a problem how a professor from university can better know than head of corporation what would happen on the market in, let's say, at least 10 years, because you need 2-3 years to reshape the curriculum, and then you have attract students, and there is a cycle of 3 + 2 years. So there's a decay. So if I'm thinking about future shape of economy after a decade, spending 14 hours at university daily, I'm not very credible. So the most important impact that we have from relations from business is the strategical orientation of university, how to direct its offer, how to design its offer. But also we need, and we get lots of financial support also, and support that I mentioned earlier during classes. I mean, they offer, and for several reasons. As alumni, they want to. Alumni depend on the position of university. So they, of course, want to support us because they support themselves. Everybody had a good time as a student at any university. So that's a good memory, and then you return to university with pleasure, just to talk to guys and to see how new students look like. So there is lots of psychological motives for which they come. More important that they never want any rewarding for that in terms of monetary compensation. And they make our lecture much more attractive, practical and oriented toward application, which is important for students who invest, as I was trying to explain. They invest their time and lots of money, because it's not only fee which is to be spent. Therefore, they expect these applications and see how this theory can be applied, this academic knowledge can be applied, and they get it from alumni, from really a front line. So those are the most, I think, important and immediate reasons why we put such an effort to be in touch and to show also for our alumni that they are part of universities. And it's also a maybe interesting comment that internet is very supportive, because during events like that we can address everything to our alumni and having their emails, we can inform them fast and so on. So completely new relations that build community which is not only intramural but really extramural. But of course this is a difficult partner because it's difficult to communicate with over 100,000 of alumni, and some of them maybe will not like to cooperate. So we used to have the strategy for openness and informing that we are open. Yeah.
Do I have some other questions? Yes.
Just I'm wondering if there is a process where the alumni are providing more and more of the support, the financial support for universities, and is it a process that can go further and further? A lot of the older private universities in the U.S. are funded by alumni. Is that something that can continue on to be 60%, 80% in the coming years, or do you see is it stable?
Well, I think that I'm not satisfied with the level of cooperation I have, because as far as I know here, it can be, like you mentioned, 40, 50, 60% of the budget of university that comes from private sources. But it comes not as a donation. We have relatively high donations. It is not comparable with our needs, but it's a significant amount of money. The problem is that we need orders, and they need also our knowledge on new methods and so on. So this should be trade and not donation, not philanthropy. So our problem is, I think, in Europe generally, but in Central Eastern Europe especially, that's a problem to transform income that we have, which is based on soft motives, into more economic transaction. Then it's stable and probably can be multiplied by one order, I mean by 10, not by 2 or 3. And that would help us to expand the campus. We would like to do this, and also to organize the work in a more rational thing. So that's one of the reasons I'm coming here, just to see how you do this, because your university is famous as the one that can, and I've seen this in programs, unbelievably interact with business environment and provide them with what they need. And that means that you do not only have income, but you also have this income and satisfy their needs, which is extremely important for such an institution. And this is our task, in fact, that we are starting. There is lots of possibilities, because in such cooperation you may work on data that are usually not revealed, and you can, in neutral environment of university, process the data and then give integrated results that do not reveal a trade secret, but they give important knowledge. So from such context, I, for example, know that in Poland, the biggest corporations that interact with us plan to increase employment, which means for me that in these branches of economy there will be demand for some educational service, and I have to start immediately activities to offer them non-certified education, executive education, because that's what they will need, and so this is a direction which is so important for us, and that's why we put so much effort to revitalize these relations.
Anyone else? I'm coming.
Bologna process, yeah. Sorry. When I mentioned in Bologna, in fact, there's a place in Italy, there was a conference of rectors of European universities, and they made, in Europe is very, very exceptional situation, a statement like 50% of a page, that European system should change its rules and increase mobility and allow students to study, that they are overcharged. I'm simplifying, maybe oversimplifying, but this is important, you know. So on one page they in fact built a program which appeared very, very important, and it was discussed by, I think next year, by ministers of education from different countries in one of European Parliament session, and they decided to start a process which will allow to realize this postulate of mobility and so mobility, openness, and give, somehow discharge students from an algorithmic way of teaching, you know. So memorizing and so on, and allow them to study on themselves and rather control them in the class than provide them with material to memorize. And that appeared very technical, because it appeared that if you would like to increase mobility, so student after a semester at one university to be accepted in the second semester, there was a problem how to confirm and allow him to return to his country at the third semester, and not return back to the second one. And then we are in Europe, so we have very different grades, different scales, when things are graded, different curricula, and so on. So there is a sophisticated program, how control not topics of lectures, but skills and that is mastered after this, how to control this, and so on. This is so. For example, Polish and other European universities at very different speed re-engineer their systems of evaluation of students, from measuring information that is given during lecture and checked by exam, to the system that skills are identified. So a student comes and learns what he will be able to do after the course, and it changes also methods of checking this acquired knowledge and skills, and all of this is called Bologna process.
So then the time you kind of standardize all of Europe?
It's not exactly standardization, because in Europe all this process goes from bottom to up. So maybe the result will be a sort of standardization, but resulting from convergence, not from administration. Let me give you an example. At my university, for example, so first of all, we were school teaching 5 years. Master degree was the only one that was recognized by Polish society. After Bologna process, bachelor degree appeared to be necessity. We were allowed, if you say this word is not correctly used, but we could organize 5 years lasting master studies, but it's completely irrational. So in fact, one day almost the whole Polish university is split into 2 degrees. And then my experience is that I have 1/3, I'm teaching economy and management based on quantitative methods. And now at the graduate concentrations, I have 1/3 students which are coming from technical universities and want to expand their knowledge. before they teach, because they have to evaluate not only knowledge, I mean, in mathematical things, those really theorems, in chapters of books, whatever, but also what is practical implication of mastering this knowledge, and is the course preparing to use this knowledge. So this is purely, and that's also because union thinks about education as a way to solve unemployment problems, and of course creativity. So if we are thinking about inventions, innovations, they want to direct the education into the goal, which is create people who can impact the economy with educated knowledge. So these are two important goals. One of them is unemployment, so decrease unemployment through creation of people who know how to apply knowledge, and secondly, to create positive attitudes from point of view of innovations. And that's why skills are important. But this is very difficult. If my colleague is teaching history of economic thought, how to transform this into economic outcome, for example, how to measure if his teaching is leading to impact on economy. I'm teaching mathematics. What I can change in checking knowledge of my students. But if you think on that, suddenly you see that you can offer problems that check whether your mathematical theorems can solve very, very simple problems rising from practical things.
And we are out of time, so thank you very much for coming. Join us at Flames if you'd like. Thank you, Professor.